Reverend Wendy continues her series From Struggle to Well-Being. This series is based on the book What's in the Way is the Way by Mary O'Malley.
So we're going to talk a little bit about fear, understanding it, dealing with it, and embracing, recognizing the truth that we are actually not alone. But that's the second part of the message this morning. As I said, we are exploring, in part, Mary O'Malley's book, What's in the Way is the Way. And one of the overarching themes in her book is this idea that we can experience life, no matter what's happening in it, and not experience struggle in the way that we usually do. That there's a different way of experiencing the issues and the stuff going on in our lives that can still allow us to touch and experience that state of peacefulness and that state of inner joy. I love how synchronicity works in my life. And I had some of that just this past week when one of our younger members asked me if I would consider doing a class on the topic of fear. And I said, yes, I'll think about that. It'll take me a little while perhaps to put it together. And then 2 days later, when I opened up my file to take a look at what I was going to be speaking on today, lo and behold, talking on fear, you are not alone. I thought, thank you, God. And I sent off a little message to that member, and I said, well, it's not a class, but I am talking about the subject that you asked me to speak about. So fear. Do any of you still deal at all with feelings of fear? If you do, either raise your hand or, oh, that's a lot of us. Okay, I do too. And we want to take a look at how do we understand that better and how do we deal with it better. Some of the homework assignment that I had suggested last week that we practiced throughout the week had to do with really paying attention to ourselves and noticing when we begin to feel an internal tightness and when we begin to constrict or contract or pull away from life. Because when we have that response or that reaction, we have it for a reason. Something has triggered us, something external has triggered us, and rather than finding a way to be with it in openness and in wisdom, we shut down and we tighten up and we pull back. And when we do that, we are literally strangling the possibility for larger ideas and the possibility for a more creative way forward. If there's only one idea that you walk away with this morning, this is the idea that I'd like to suggest you walk away with. It's right from the book. Fear is always happening within a greater space in you that is not afraid. Take that in for a moment. Fear is always happening within a greater space in you that is not afraid. It's always happening in a greater space in us that is not afraid. As soon as we really remember that, then whatever it is that's triggering that feeling of tightness and constriction and fear and struggle is seen and experienced in proper perspective. A piece of understanding our fears is looking beyond the thing that triggers the fear to what's beneath the experience of the fear, the why of the fear. And when we can get a little bit of clarity on the why of the fear, we will be able to deal with it much more effectively and not just deal with that particular trigger that triggered the fear, but we will be able to deal then with all of the times that those triggers touch that particular core fear. Can you think of something that today still might frighten you? If you can, hold that in your mind and explore with me what's beneath that fear. I'm going to read something to you from the book, and then I want to share a little bit about some of my own experiences around fear. So Mary O'Malley writes, if you are honest with yourself, you'll see that most of the time you are pushed, pulled, prodded, and engulfed by thoughts and feelings that have been with you since you were very young. The longing to be liked, to be perfect, to be the best, to be safe, to be in control, to be right. The belief that you are less than or not enough. The sense that if only you were able to change yourself and your life, then everything would be okay. The stories that these beliefs spin in your mind may change over the years, but the essence of them is the same as when you were young. So if you look very closely at what goes through your mind all day long, you will see that the self-image you crawled into as a child is still alive and active inside of you. So being able to transcend those fears that the storyteller in our mind constructed when we were very young requires understanding not just what's triggering the fear, but what the fear is really about. When I was called into ministry and made the decision to accept that call, one of my very greatest fears was triggered. And it was the fear of getting up in front of people and speaking. That's a real liability as a minister. Would you not agree? It really scared me. I can remember the first time we needed to give a 2 or 3 minute talk in ministerial school. I prayed I would be the very first person to do it so that I wouldn't have to sit in class for an hour being scared to death as everybody else was doing their job. And so I had this fear of speaking. And yet, fast forward years, and I learned that it was less the fear of actually speaking, because when you think about it, speak all the time, just in different contexts, right? So could it really be the physical act of speaking that was so frightening? Not really. In probing it much deeper, I remembered a situation when I was a very little girl of being left alone on the dance floor in a wedding, and the MC of the wedding saying something about this little girl all alone on the dance floor, and wouldn't somebody please come and rescue her? And I'm standing there feeling totally humiliated and embarrassed. And as soon as I touched that memory, I realized that the fear of public speaking wasn't really the fear of speaking. It was the fear of embarrassment. And then being able to look at those other times in my life where maybe I would say no or I would pull back from an opportunity. I had a pattern I could look at and say, wait a minute, what is it really about? Is this once again about a fear of embarrassing yourself? And as soon as you can identify what that is, then you deal with it a little bit differently. Oh, it's not the act of speaking that I need to get over. That's skill-based. I can learn some things about that. But how do I heal that little girl that was so afraid of being embarrassed? Does this make sense? Right? So the exploration, and she talks about this kind of idea a lot in the book, that when we notice that we're struggling, whether the struggle is creating fear or some other emotion that we don't want to be experiencing, that we want to go deeper in trying to understand what it's about. And she suggests that one of the most helpful ways of going deeper is not to be resisting the fear. That only makes the fear feel bigger, right? So not resisting the fear, but getting familiar with it, getting curious about it, uncovering and discovering how it lives inside of you, not what it keeps you from, but how it lives inside of you. Specifically, she suggests, ask yourself when you are afraid, what does it feel like in your body and what does it feel like in your mind or sound like in your mind? When you're afraid, what does it feel like in your body? Where do you feel it? Not everybody feels emotional fear in exactly the same way. Some people feel emotional fear in the pit of their stomach, as if they could physically get sick. Other people experience emotional fear with sweaty palms, others with absolute nervous body movements. I'm sure you've seen people who are afraid to get up in front of others and speak, and you can see it all over their body. They're grasping the podium, not for emphasis, but for dear life, because their knees are shaking so much. I was very fortunate. For whatever reason, you could never tell I was afraid. But that didn't mean I wasn't experiencing fear in that moment. It just looked different than perhaps other people. So what does it feel like inside of you? The more you know you, the more information you have to be able to heal or transcend the parts of you or the ways of being that are getting in your way from what you really want to be experiencing and creating in your life. So what does it feel like in your body? What's going on in your mind? She suggests that the storyteller, let me make sure I find the quote, our storyteller is based on fear and glued together with judgment. Remember we talked about her language, her expression, the storyteller, that part of our mind that is always naming and labeling things in negative and critical ways and judging and evaluating in a way that is holding us back, that is bringing up all of the limiting thoughts and beliefs and messages that we picked up along the way in our childhood and in our families of origin and in our culture and so forth. She says the storyteller is based on fear and glued together with judgment. What is it that you're telling yourself? And could you tell yourself something different? That's not a rhetorical question right now. Could you tell yourself something different? It's really not a rhetorical question. It's an easy yes or no answer, and hint, no is not the right answer. Absolutely. Now, whether you and I choose to tell ourselves something different is an entirely other matter. But the truth is you and I can tell ourselves something different. We can challenge in a playful way the message of the storyteller. We can say, if only this, thank you for sharing. Or send it to voicemail, never to be picked up again. Thank you for sharing. Mary O'Malley writes, when you live in the fear-based stories of your mind, you react to life. When you live from the meadow of your being, the truth of your being, you respond to life. Fear causes you to contract rather than open. Fear causes you to protect rather than connect. Think about that. We build walls, physically and psychologically, instead of extending an arm, instead of building a bridge. Fear causes us to resist rather than respond. And it keeps us stuck in survival rather than thriving. Jesus said, I came that you should have life and have it abundantly. To me, that does not mean just merely survive it. It means to really thrive, and it doesn't mean about an accumulation of stuff. It means about an inner quality, an inner experience of life that is joy-filled, that is still anchored in reality, but not stuck there, that understands that we live in the realm of possibility as well. She writes, as soon as you see the stories of fear that you crawled into, you can begin to see through them. As soon as you see the stories of fear you crawled into, then you can move through them. Krishnamurti said, it is not that you must be free from fear. The moment you try to free yourself from fear, you create resistance to the fear. Resistance in any form does not end fear. What is needed, rather than running away or controlling or suppressing or any other resistance, is understanding fear. That means watch it, learn about it, come directly into contact with it. What? So I have a fear of speaking. Let me come directly into contact with it. So this is a homework assignment for those of you in life groups. Be the first to sign up for the opening or closing prayer. I understand that's the one that people are so afraid of. You can't do it wrong. You can't do it wrong. And what doors you open for others when you model doing something that you are afraid of, and others see you stretching into that, they're inspired to take a step and stretch as well. Would you not agree that if we were more courageous spiritually and emotionally and morally, ethically, that we would create a better world not only for ourselves and our families, but for everyone else? Absolutely we would. Absolutely we would. So we step into the fear with a playful curiosity. We face it. We don't turn away from it. We don't make it a bigger monster. We quiet the storyteller. I'm reminded of one of my favorite teachers and instructors. Her name is Pema Chodron. I've read so many of her books and I watch a lot of her teachings. She is a Buddhist nun, and she tells of a nightmare that she used to have repeatedly. And it was kind of an archetypical nightmare, a nightmare of being chased by a scary monster kind of being that was out to kill her. And it was a very frightening dream that she would have, and she would have it often. And she'd always wake up just before the monster got her, right? The subconscious protects us in that way. She'd always wake up just before the monster got her. But she wanted to be beyond the dream. This is an accomplished Buddhist teacher, right? She wanted to be beyond that dream. And so she shared it with a friend who said to her, the next time you have that dream, turn around instead of running away from the monster and look at it and face it. And so Pema wanted to try that, but she was too afraid to do it. And the next time she had the dream, she didn't. But the time after that, so see, sometimes we don't do the thing we know we need to do the first time we know we need to do it. Sometimes it's like a lot of trial and error. So the next time that she had the dream, what happened is as she's running away from this monster, a big wall presents itself right in front of her in the dream. Now she can't run through the wall. What does she have to do? She has to turn around and face the monster. And so she turns around in the dream and she faces the monster squarely in the eye. The monster stops moving. She likes that part. And she notices the monster has pink fingernails. Gotta love a monster that has pink fingernails, right? I mean, we could do a whole message on what that's really suggesting mystically and metaphysically. And she said from that moment on, she never, ever had that dream again. What is it about? It's about facing the thing that scares us. It's about looking at it directly. It's about changing our relationship to it. It, to me, is in part the deeper teaching of what Jesus said when he said that we were to turn the other cheek. When somebody strikes you on one cheek, turn to him the other cheek also. It absolutely is a teaching on the principles of nonviolence. It is also a teaching, though, on perspective. And it is a teaching on perspective in that when you turn the other cheek, so visualize it, when somebody slaps you on the cheek, you are to turn to him the other cheek also. What happens the moment that you do that? Your field of vision changes, right? You are seeing now something different than what you saw before. A great deal of our spiritual growth and development is rooted in that very kind of practice. Practicing, choosing to look at things differently, including the things that we are afraid of, including when we notice that we are feeling tight and constricted, looking at it differently, looking at it through the eyes of curiosity. What does this mean? What is it trying to teach me so that I can then transcend it. So that was a bit about how to look at and deal with fear in a different way. In this section of the book, she also writes about a fundamental teaching I believe within all spiritual practice, and that is that we are not alone. We may physically look alone from time to time, but don't ever let appearances fool you. You are not alone. You are not alone. Ever since humanity started to awaken, we try to understand the world and universe that we live in. And in our very primitive states of consciousness and awareness, we didn't know a lot. And we looked out upon life around us, and it could be pretty scary. It was a pretty threatening environment, a pretty threatening world. Things happened in nature that we had no idea what was behind them, and the way we often looked at it and described it to ourselves and to others had to do with, we must have been wrong or done something really bad, that God or nature did this terrible thing to us. In the same way that physically every species either evolves or dies out, in the same way that we are physically evolving as a species, we are also evolving in consciousness. We no longer have the same primitive understandings of the universe or our place in it as our ancestors who first got up as Homo sapiens and walked. We have a much greater understanding, and yet, for many of us, we still have a very primitive concept of God. If I were to ask you, what do you think is the average person's description or understanding of God, I bet we would find a lot of common agreement in this room. Where is God? For most people, where is God? Up there. Up there. What gender is God? What does God look like? An old white man, right, with a flowing beard. Brian! My brother from New York. You're not old enough, sorry, Brian. Sitting on a cloud, right? And having some who are chosen and some who are not chosen. You see, I believe since the first awakening of humanity, that we have sensed that there is something bigger than us operative in the universe. And we've grown, some more than others, in understanding what that something is. We do not look at God as an anthropomorphic, gender-based being located somewhere in time and space that plays favorites with his children. That is not our concept of God. Our concept of God is the concept of beingness itself taking form in and through all of life. It is beingness itself. Our concept of God is far more akin to the theories in quantum physics than the theories in Newtonian physics. In Newtonian physics, we live in a universe that's more like a machine with lots of separate parts working sometimes together well and other times together not well with a certain amount of predictability. But everything is separate. In a quantum physics understanding of the universe, everything is not separate. Everything is what? Connected. Connected. Everything relates to everything else, including us and this beingness that we call God or Spirit or George or the divine or our higher power. It does not matter what we call it, but what does matter is that we understand its presence and power in us, and that we live and move, as the Apostle Paul said, we live and move and have our beingness in it. We are not separate from it. When we get that, the idea that we are not alone becomes so real to us. And now we have something beyond ourselves that supports us, and we know it is supporting us. We are anchored in that, and it gives us strength to say yes to those things that in the past, out of child-based fears or other fears, that we would have said no to. Course in Miracles teaches, if you knew who walked beside you, you would never be afraid. Because you see, the you that is sitting here, or the me that is standing here in physical form, is one small part of what I am and one small part of what you are. And whatever it is that you are dealing with in your life, whatever fear you might be experiencing, whatever struggle, while it is real on one level, it is not the totality of you by a long shot. And as you remember that and as you live from that, you're going to find everything in your life is very different than what it is right now. You're going to find that you're able to say yes with strength and power and confidence and courage to the things that you know your soul has said you are here to do. And you're not going to be worried about convincing anybody else of why your yes is so very strong. You're going to know it, because you know that you're not walking it alone. So some homework, bringing it down to reality. Some homework. The homework is paying attention this week to when you do feel afraid. It's okay to feel afraid. It's not okay to ignore it. It's okay to feel it, to recognize it, and then to be playfully curious about it. What's beneath it for you? Is it a fear of failing? Is it a fear of getting physically hurt? Is it a fear of abandonment? I don't know what it is for you. But if you don't already know what it is for you, I know you can find out what it is if you sincerely ask the question and you gently pay attention and wait for the answer. So notice when you feel afraid and be willing to go a little deeper with it so you can find out what some of those core fears are. Then you can move through them. And challenge yourself in whatever way will speak to you to remember that you are not making this journey alone. That there is a presence, there is a power within you and all around you that will guide you and support you and encourage you. But you have to keep your eyes open to it. And you have to be willing to accept it. Namaste.
Many people enjoy Reverend Wendy's talks and meditations and aren't able to attend the Unity Center in person. If you're part of our extended family from around the world and would like to help support the Unity Center, please go to our website or download our free app, which offers even more ways to connect with the Unity Center. Namaste.